We have decided that this bonus will go to Charlotte, the director announced at the general meeting, awarding his mistress the annual bonus, even though it was I who had brought in the VIP client. I stood up in silence and headed for the exit, but just as I reached the door, I turned around and said a phrase that plunged the entire room into dead silence. Corporate offices always smell the same: a mix of coffee, printer toner, and unfulfilled ambitions. I slowly breathed it in as I walked into the spacious conference room of Henderson Innovations precisely at 10 a.m. on the day of the annual bonus meeting. A nervous shiver ran down my spine. Today could be the day when 10 years of hard work would finally be recognized. My name is Emily Reed, and I've given 10 years of my life to this company. 10 years of early mornings and late nights. 10 years of missed birthdays, postponed dates, and dreams left on hold. I once had a dream to start my own consulting firm, but Henderson Innovations offered stability, a corporate ladder, and the promise that hard work would be rewarded. So I shelved the dream for later and immersed myself in the job. I was the perfect employee, loyal, competent, always willing to take on extra tasks. No weekends when a deadline loomed. No complaints when my vacation was postponed yet again due to a critical business matter. Last year, I even missed my godmother's funeral because of an important presentation. James Henderson, our director, told me then, "That's what I appreciate about you, Emily. You understand that business doesn't wait." Morning, Emily. Ready for the big day? Rachel Davis, my closest friend at the company, greeted me at the door holding 2 cups of coffee. She was 2 years older than me, with short chestnut hair and perceptive eyes that rarely missed a detail. After her divorce 3 years ago, Rachel had developed a special kind of cynicism about people, one that somehow coexisted with a deep kindness toward those she deemed worthy. "Thanks," I said, taking the cup and taking a sip. Americano, double, no sugar, exactly what I needed. Let's just say I'm ready to finally be recognized for bringing in Madison Technologies. "You deserve that bonus more than anyone," Rachel whispered. "Though I've heard Charlotte's hoping for it too. She was in James's office for almost an hour yesterday. Then they left together in his car." I sighed. Charlotte Pierce. She'd joined the company 8 months ago, fresh out of an elite business school, and had already been promoted twice. A slim blonde with always perfect makeup and skirts just short enough to test the limits of the corporate dress code. There were whispers around the office that her resume wasn't all that impressive, but her interview, especially the part alone with James, had gone very well. For what accomplishments? Laughing at his unfunny jokes? I rolled my eyes, but unease gnawed at me inside. Yes, I was the one who brought in Madison Technologies. 4 months of intense negotiations, dozens of nights spent on presentations, hundreds of emails and calls, a contract that boosted our annual revenue by 40%. Even James had been impressed when I closed the deal. "Excellent work, Emily," he'd said, patting me on the back. "You'll see, this won't go unnoticed." But Charlotte had something I didn't, a special relationship with James Henderson, and that could outweigh any business achievement. "Hey, don't you think it's odd that she's always taking notes after meetings with our key clients?" Rachel suddenly asked. "Peter from IT said he caught her sending some files through her personal email, not the corporate one." "You think she's leaking information?" I frowned. "I don't know, but something about her gives me the creeps." Rachel shook her head. "Anyway, let's grab our seats. It's starting soon." The conference room was almost full, around 50 employees, all anticipating bonuses and recognition. The air buzzed with tension. Rachel and I took seats in the second row. I glanced around the room. There was Mark from sales, still celebrating his recent big deal, even though it was half the size of mine. There was Jessica from HR, always a little more tense around James. What had gone on between them, I wondered? And there was David Martin, the quiet genius from finance, sitting alone in a corner, nervously adjusting his glasses. He'd looked especially stressed in recent weeks. And then there was Charlotte, sitting in the front row, one leg elegantly crossed over the other, perfect posture, rehearsed smile. That smile always gave me chills, lips curved into a flawless arc, teeth gleaming with ad-like whiteness. But the eyes remained cold like a jewelry store display. My grandmother used to say, "A real smile shines through the eyes, sweetheart." But Charlotte's dazzling surface masked the cold, calculating stare of a predator scouting her next victim. I shivered involuntarily. It was like watching a beautiful movie with the sound turned off. Everything looked right, but something felt off. At exactly 10 o'clock, James Henderson entered the room. 53 years old, always in a flawless suit and with the expression of a man utterly confident in his superiority over everyone else in the room, he was the kind of person who used a wide smile to conceal the chill in his eyes. I always thought he resembled an antique dagger in a glass case, polished to perfection, mesmerizing in its beauty, and utterly deadly if held too close. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to our annual meeting," he began, scanning the room. "Today, we honor those who made exceptional contributions to the growth of our company." For the next 40 minutes, James listed off the year's accomplishments, most of which, somehow, traced back to his own brilliance. Thanks to my diversification strategy, after I introduced a new approach to marketing, when I initiated talks with, I noticed a few employees exchanging glances. Everyone knew the truth. James was a master at claiming others' ideas and presenting them as his own. But no one dared speak up. Not in this company, where loyalty was valued above competence and team spirit meant do as you're told. I noticed how the board members sitting in the front row were listening intently. Elizabeth Foster, the chairwoman of the board, seemed to be making mental notes. She was known for her sharp insight and the keen intellect that lay behind her kindly face. Once or twice during James's speech, I caught her casting a slightly skeptical glance. Then the bonus announcements began. The Innovation Award went to the development team for a project I helped coordinate. The Marketing Campaign of the Year went to Tim, who had used my target audience analysis. The Process Improvement Award went to Lisa, who implemented a system I had proposed 3 years ago. I tried to remain calm, but my fingers tightened around my cup with each passing minute. Finally, it was time for the main award. And finally, James's voice noticeably warmed, the top award of the year for bringing in a key client. We all know how important the Madison Technologies contract is to us. He paused, and I felt my heart begin to race. This was my moment. At last, my work would be acknowledged. "We've decided to give this award to Charlotte," James announced, smiling directly at her. Her innovative approach to the marketing strategy played a crucial role. A ripple of whispers swept through the room. I felt Rachel turn to look at me, but I couldn't meet her gaze. I couldn't look at anyone. Something inside me snapped. Innovative approach? What damn innovative approach? Charlotte wasn't even involved in the negotiations. She'd made a few slides for the initial presentation, that's it. I led this project from the first call to the signed contract. I spent nights analyzing the client's needs. I flew to Chicago 3 times on my own dime because James had slashed the travel budget. Charlotte flounced up from her seat, flawless smile, flawless hair, the flawless performance of bubbling joy. She approached James, accepted the envelope containing the $20,000 bonus, and began her acceptance speech. "Thank you, James. Thank you to the whole team. This is such an honor. I'm so glad my work has been recognized. When I suggested a new strategy for Madison's presentation, I never expected—" Not a word about me. Not a single acknowledgement that I existed, that I was the one who spent hundreds of hours preparing materials, that I went to all the client meetings, that I was the one who convinced them to sign the contract. My ears rang, and for a moment, everything went dark. 10 years I had been a team player. 10 years of nodding and smiling while James claimed my ideas as his own. 10 years of working twice as hard as the men in the company for half the recognition. I stood up silently and walked toward the exit. My footsteps felt thunderous against the carpet, though in truth, no one heard them over Charlotte's speech. But just as I reached the door, something made me stop. 10 years. 10 years of compromises, concessions, and silence. 10 years of letting myself be used. I turned around. James, my voice rang out louder than I expected, cutting Charlotte off mid-sentence. You forgot to mention that while I was negotiating with Madison, you were busy taking Charlotte to bed every Tuesday and Thursday after work, and that your wife still thinks you're staying late for important meetings, just like the board still doesn't know about your financial manipulations in the last quarterly report. A dead silence fell over the room. Several expressions flashed across James's face: shock, anger, and finally, fear. Charlotte had gone pale. Her perfect lips parted, but no sound came out. I saw David from finance flinch sharply and stare at me, eyes wide. Other employees were frozen, some in shock, others with thinly veiled satisfaction. One of the junior staff even started to take out his phone but quickly tucked it away when he caught my eye. Elizabeth Foster from the board slowly turned and fixed her gaze on James, her face unreadable. I turned and walked out before anyone could say a word. Adrenaline surged through my veins, drowning out the fear of what I'd just done. For the first time in 10 years, I felt truly free. Emily, oh my God, are you out of your mind? You just destroyed your career. Rachel burst into my office without knocking, closed the door behind her, and dropped into the chair across from me. I sat, motionless, still trying to process what I had just done. The euphoria was already giving way to the cold awareness of consequences. I had just publicly accused the CEO of the company of adultery and financial fraud in front of the entire staff. In corporate America, that was basically professional suicide. I know, Rachel, but I couldn't stay silent any longer. 10 years. 10 years of missing my niece's birthdays, canceling dates. You mean not going on dates at all? Rachel cut in, frowning. God, your cat Mr. Darcy is the only man you've spent Friday nights with. And how long has that been? 4 years? I couldn't help but smile, though it came out bitter. And at least he doesn't cheat on me with the new hire. Rachel looked at me with a mixture of horror and admiration. You realize they're going to fire you, right? Not just fire you, paint you as some jealous lunatic who made it all up. I nodded. I didn't need the reminder. Corporations always protect their own, especially those at the top. But how do you even know about James and Charlotte? And what manipulations? Rachel lowered her voice. I took a deep breath. I needed to tell someone, and Rachel was the only person in this company I trusted. Remember that Tuesday a month ago when I stayed late working on the Madison presentation? I looked her straight in the eyes. I forgot my charger in the third-floor conference room, went back around 9, and heard sounds coming from James's office. Oh no, Rachel covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Oh yes, they were very engaged. I grimaced at the memory. And it wasn't the first time. I started paying attention. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Charlotte stays late. So does James. And that's why she's had 2 promotions in 8 months, Rachel said grimly. Damn, and here I thought she just had a way with Excel. That made both of us laugh nervously, but the laughter faded quickly. What about the financial report? Rachel asked, leaning forward. I lowered my voice, though we were alone. James is cooking the books. David Martin from finance noticed discrepancies while preparing the quarterly report. James forced him to alter some of the figures to hide the drop in profits from the shareholders. How do you know? David told me. I recalled our quiet conversation at a small cafe near the office where no one from the company ever went. We were working on the investor presentation together, and he needed someone to talk to. He was terrified and didn't know what to do. Rachel leaned back in her chair, thinking it over. Shit, I always knew James was a bastard, but I didn't think he was an idiot too. Choosing a fling with someone in his own company? And not just any employee. A new marketing hire he personally promotes every 3 months, I added. He's always had a thing for young blondes. Remember Christine from advertising 3 years ago? Or Taylor from PR? Oh God, you're right. Rachel shook her head. Same pattern every time. Quick promotions, trips with him, then they either leave with glowing references or suddenly get transferred to some far-off branch. I didn't get a chance to reply. There was a knock on the door, and Margaret Frost, the HR director, walked in. Her stern face showed no emotion, but I knew her well enough to spot the tension in the corners of her eyes. "Emily, may I speak with you for a moment?" she said, glancing briefly at Rachel. "Alone." Rachel stood up. "Of course I was just leaving," she said, squeezing my shoulder as she passed and whispering, "Hold your ground. I'm on your side." When the door closed, Margaret sat down in Rachel's chair and looked at me for a long moment. She was around 50, with a perfectly styled graying bob and always dressed in strict business suits. She had worked at the company longer than anyone, including James himself, and had a reputation for being cold but fair. No one really knew what she thought of James, but there were rumors that she was the one who blocked his attempt to fire an older employee from accounting under a flimsy pretext. Later, I learned that Margaret had her own reasons to resent James. 15 years ago, she herself had been a target of his harassment, but at the time, she hadn't had the evidence or support to act. "Emily, we're forced to place you on administrative leave pending an internal investigation," she said at last. I nodded. I had expected something like this. It was standard corporate protocol. Suspend the employee who raised the accusation and launch an investigation that usually ended in that same employee being let go. "I understand," I replied calmly, though my insides were twisted in knots. Margaret leaned in slightly, lowering her voice a bit. "Between us, do you have any proof of what you said? Not just rumors or guesses? Something concrete?" I looked at her for a long time before answering. Margaret had always seemed like an impenetrable fortress, keeping everyone at arm's length, but now I saw something in her eyes I'd never noticed before. A spark of interest, almost hope. "Yes," I finally said, "and I'm not the only one." Margaret nodded, as if that confirmed her own suspicions. "Don't give that evidence to anyone just yet," she said quietly. "There's an emergency board meeting going on right now. James is trying to convince them you're just a bitter employee who didn't get the bonus, but some board members have already suspected irregularities for a while." She stood up, getting ready to leave. "Pack your things and return your badge at reception. Security will escort you out," she added loudly, clearly for the benefit of anyone who might be listening. "Unfortunately, it's standard procedure. You'll receive full pay during your leave." At the door, she looked back and added in a quieter voice, "And Emily, be careful. James isn't the type to lose gracefully. He has connections, both in business and, let's just say, in some shady circles." While I packed my things into a cardboard box, a few colleagues peeked into my office. No one said anything outright, but many offered silent support, glances, nods, or a quiet, "Hang in there." Even Jessica from HR, always so proper and cautious, whispered, "Thank you for saying what we've all kept silent about." As I walked to the exit accompanied by a security guard, I noticed Charlotte was no longer at her desk. Her papers were scattered as if she had left in a rush. Unlike me, she apparently wasn't given a chance to pack up calmly. Just before leaving the building, I spotted David at the coffee machine. Our eyes met, and he gave me a slight nod. In his gaze, I saw a mix of fear and resolve? I wasn't sure. Outside, I took a deep breath of the cool autumn air. What have I done? I had just destroyed the career I'd spent 10 years building. I had possibly blacklisted myself across the entire industry. A single tear slid down my cheek, not from grief, but from a strange sense of relief and freedom. Later, I sat in my apartment, staring out the window. Boston continued its usual rhythm outside. People rushed about their lives, unaware that my world had just turned upside down. Mr. Darcy, my black cat with yellow eyes, jumped into my lap and meowed insistently. I scratched him behind the ears, almost mechanically. "What have I done, Darcy?" I asked him. 10 years of work, all my contacts, all my connections." Mr. Darcy purred in response. He always had his own philosophy. As long as there was food, a roof overhead, and someone to pet you, life was good. I envied his simplicity. When I challenged James, I hadn't thought about the consequences. But now, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, reality started to press in on me. My phone rang. It was my sister, Caroline. I sighed and picked up. Emily, Rachel just called me. What's going on? She said you've been suspended from work. My sister Caroline had always told me I stayed too long at Henderson Innovations. You're underestimating yourself, Emily, she would repeat. With your talent, you could be running your own company instead of serving that pompous turkey. Yes, I've been suspended, I sighed. I said something at the company meeting about James having an affair with an employee and manipulating financial reports. Silence on the other end. You actually said it? Caroline's voice was full of surprise and pride. God, finally, how long were you supposed to keep putting up with that? You're not going to say I told you so? Caroline laughed. Of course I am. I told you so, but not now. Right now, I just want to say I'm proud of you and that you can always stay with me if you need to. I smiled, a wave of gratitude washing over me. That was Caroline, hot-tempered, but always there for me. Thanks, but I'm managing for now, though I don't know how long I'll hold out financially if I don't find a new job soon. You could finally start that consulting firm you always dreamed of, Caroline said instantly. Remember, we even came up with a name, Reed Insights, or something like that. That was 10 years ago, and starting a business takes money. You have savings, don't you? And honestly, I could loan you some. Jeremy got a promotion. We're doing well right now. I knew she meant it sincerely, but the idea of taking money from my younger sister didn't sit well with me. Let's see how things play out first, I said. But thank you, really. After the call, I opened LinkedIn to update my resume and start searching for a new job. But the first thing I saw was a message from a recruiter at a competing firm. Impressed by your experience, would you be open to discussing a position? I frowned. Coincidence? Or had the news of my suspension already started to spread? I began checking business news portals and found a short piece mentioning an internal conflict at Henderson Innovations, though no details had been disclosed yet. Then came a knock at the door. I tensed. Who could it be? I hadn't ordered anything, and my friends usually let me know before dropping by. Cautiously approaching, I looked through the peephole. Standing at the door was David Martin, the financial analyst from our company, the one who had told me about the manipulation. I opened the door. David looked nervous. His glasses were askew, and his shirt was wrinkled, as if he'd been hunched over for hours. Hi, Emily. Can I come in? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I let him in. James found out I shared information, David said as soon as I closed the door. I've been suspended too. Oh God, David, I'm so sorry. He shook his head. Don't be. I should have spoken up sooner, letting him make me falsify those reports. David clenched his fists. I was just a coward. The sharpness of those last words took me by surprise. In daily life, David always seemed like a typical introvert, quiet, polite, always ready to defer. But now there was a fire in his eyes I had never seen before. You're not a coward, I said. You were trying to protect your job. My father was a financial controller, David suddenly said. He always told me, standing by while injustice happens is the same as participating in it. And I just watched and kept quiet. I realized I knew almost nothing about David, other than that he'd worked at the company for 5 years and had a reputation as reliable, if unremarkable. Why did you become a finance guy? I asked, suddenly curious. Because of your dad? David gave a faint smile, and it completely transformed his face, making him look younger and more attractive. Actually, I wanted to be a musician. I've been playing piano since I was 6, even performed at competitions. He shrugged. But my father insisted on a real profession. Said you can't make a living with music. And you just agreed? I was surprised. It didn't fit the David I was seeing in front of me now. My father died of a heart attack when I was in my 2nd year of college, David said quietly. All I had left was my sister. She needed someone stable, dependable. so I finished my finance degree and got a good job. I was silent, unsure what to say. I had never thought about what might lie behind David's quiet facade, what dreams he had buried, what compromises he had made. "I have copies of all the documents," he said, pulling a flash drive from his pocket, "and I recorded some of the conversations with James." I stared at him. "You recorded conversations? Is that legal?" David nodded. "In our state, it's allowed as long as one party is aware of the recording." "I was aware," he said with a small smile. "I started recording over a year ago when I first noticed the financial irregularities. At first, it was just for self-protection, in case James decided to make me the scapegoat. I never thought I'd actually use them." "But how did you manage to gather all this evidence without getting caught?" I asked, amazed by his foresight. "Sometimes being invisible has its advantages," David replied. "James never held back when we were alone. He didn't see me as a threat. Besides, I have access to all the company's financial systems. Part of my job is data backup. I simply created parallel versions of the original reports before making the changes James demanded." He handed me the flash drive. "It's all here, including the recording where James explicitly tells me to alter the profit figures, the original reports and the falsified ones." I took the flash drive, feeling its weight in my hand. This wasn't just information. This was a bomb. "What do you suggest we do?" I asked. "We could go to the board, or the Securities Commission." The doorbell rang again, cutting him off mid-sentence. This time it was Rachel, with a bottle of wine and a box of pizza. "I figured the weekend was too far away," she said as she walked in. "Oh, David? Didn't expect to see you here." The next 2 hours we spent discussing the situation. Rachel offered her help. "I have a journalist friend at Business Insider. He'd be interested in this story. Landon's always on the lookout for corporate scandals, especially ones with a gender angle." David nervously fiddled with a napkin. "What if we all lose our jobs? I've got a mortgage and a sister who depends on me." I saw real, deep fear in his eyes. "Your sister?" I asked gently. David swallowed. "She's disabled, spinal injury from a car accident. I pay for her treatment and care." His voice faltered. "Without this job and the insurance, I won't be able to support her the same way, and finding a new job with comparable benefits would be tough, especially if James starts spreading rumors about me." I felt a pang of guilt. With my impulsive outburst at the meeting, I might have jeopardized not only my own future, but the life of an innocent person. "David, I'm not asking you to sacrifice yourself. I can do this on my own." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Listen, I know you're worried about your sister, but think, if James is doing what you say, eventually it'll come out anyway, and then it could be worse. Shareholders will sue, the company might collapse." We discussed our financial situations. I had savings to last about 6 months if I lived frugally. Rachel admitted that while her position in the company was still stable, she had started looking for other opportunities, fearing she'd become a target because of her friendship with me. David revealed he had just refinanced his mortgage and was now especially vulnerable. "Maybe I should talk to a lawyer," I suggested, "before we take any official steps." Rachel nodded. "Good idea. I know someone, Samantha Greer. She specializes in labor disputes and corporate litigation, and most importantly, she's not afraid of big companies." David was silent for a long time, staring at his hands. Then he looked up, and I saw determination in his eyes. "Number, I've stayed silent too long. My father always said, standing by while injustice happens is the same as participating in it. If I back down now, I'll never be able to look my sister in the eye." I noticed that he repeated that phrase again, and I realized it meant something very personal to him. We agreed to meet in a week at a neutral cafe to discuss a strategy. In the meantime, I would meet with Samantha, and Rachel promised to carefully talk to other female employees who might be willing to support our claims. Late that evening, returning from a grocery run, I noticed something was off with my car. As I got closer, I saw all 4 tires had been slashed. On the windshield was a note. "Stop. before it gets worse." My heart raced. This was no longer just about being fired. This was a real threat. I immediately called Samantha, with whom I had an appointment scheduled the next day. She advised me to report everything to the police right away and to photograph everything as evidence. The next morning, I discovered my Instagram account had been hacked. Fake sexually explicit posts had been published under my name. My email inbox was flooded with spam. By lunchtime, I got a call from my bank alerting me to suspicious activity on my credit card. This was clearly no coincidence. Someone was systematically trying to destroy my life. And whoever it was had serious technical and financial resources. The following day, I sat in the office of Samantha Greer. Rachel had recommended her. They'd met at some charity event. Samantha turned out to be a petite woman in her mid-40s with sharp dark eyes and an energy that seemed to fill the entire room. Unlike my image of a typical lawyer, she wasn't wearing a stiff suit but dark jeans and a white blouse. "All right." Samantha leaned back in her chair after reviewing the documents and hearing my story. "You've got financial records showing fraud, recorded conversations, and a witness to workplace sexual misconduct, plus threats. I like this case, Ms. Reed." Her bluntness caught me a bit off guard. "What can we actually achieve?" I asked. Samantha looked at me carefully. "The question is, what do you want to achieve? Money? Revenge? Justice?" I paused to think. What did I really want? When I said that sentence in the conference room, I was fueled by pure rage. I hadn't thought about consequences. But now? "I want people like James to understand they can't treat others like pawns and get away with it," I finally said. Samantha smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile. "Then let's have some fun." She poured us both coffee and began asking more detailed questions. I liked her style, direct, unsentimental, but clearly driven by a sense of justice. "You need to understand this won't be easy," Samantha said, sipping her coffee. "Corporations, especially ones like yours, have armies of lawyers. They'll try to discredit you, paint you as crazy or vengeful." "I'm ready for that," I said, though the thought of public humiliation made my stomach knot. "They may offer you a settlement in exchange for silence," Samantha continued. "Sometimes a very generous one. You'll need to decide in advance whether you're willing to accept that." I shook my head. "I don't want money. I want James to be held accountable for his actions." Samantha studied me carefully. "You do understand this could affect not just your career at this company, but your prospects in the industry overall? Many executives won't want to hire someone who publicly accused their boss. It's unfair, but that's the reality of business." "I understand the risks," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure inside. "Good," Samantha nodded. "In that case, we need a plan. I suggest a multi-level approach. First, we file an official complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for discrimination and creating a hostile work environment. Second, we prepare documentation for the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding financial misconduct. Third, we build a case against the company for wrongful termination and retaliation." "What about the threats?" I asked, showing her the photo of my slashed tires and the note, and mentioning the hacked accounts. "That actually helps us," Samantha said, jotting something down in her notebook. "It shows you're being harassed and reinforces the seriousness of the situation. Have you reported it to the police?" I nodded. "Good. Now you need to install security cameras at home and consider temporarily staying with friends or family. Also, you should immediately change all your passwords and enable two-factor authentication on every account." "You think there could be a physical threat?" A chill ran down my spine. Samantha looked at me seriously. "Probably not, but it's better to be cautious. James is a man used to power and control. When people like that feel their position is threatened, they can become unpredictable. And the fact that he's already resorting to such underhanded tactics means he won't stop easily." Over the next 2 weeks, Samantha and I developed a strategy. She filed a formal complaint with the EEOC on my behalf, accusing the company of discrimination and fostering a hostile work environment. At the same time, we prepared documents for a potential case with the SEC over financial fraud. During this time, my financial situation became strained. My savings were vanishing faster than I expected, especially after I had to pay for car repairs and IT services to recover my accounts. I began to doubt whether rejecting the idea of a quick settlement had been wise. Caroline offered help again, and this time I accepted, at least as a temporary loan. Despite his fears, David agreed to testify. He provided copies of all documents and the recordings. Rachel used her network to discreetly gather statements from other female employees who had also experienced inappropriate behavior from James. "We already have 5 women willing to testify," Rachel told me during one of our meetings. 3 former employees and 2 current ones. One of them is Jessica from HR. She said James tried to kiss her at a company party 2 years ago, and when she rejected him, he threatened to demote her. "Jessica?" I was surprised. "She always seemed so loyal to the company." "That's exactly why she stayed quiet," Rachel shrugged. "But your actions inspired her. She says she's tired of covering for him." One evening, coming back from a meeting with Samantha, I found I couldn't get into my apartment. The lock had been changed. There was a message on my phone from the building manager. There was a system error. "Your rent hasn't gone through for the past 3 months. The balance needs to be settled immediately." It was a lie. I had always paid rent on time via autopay. When I checked my bank account, I discovered the recent payments hadn't gone through, even though I had enough funds. Someone was deliberately trying to cause problems for me, and I had a good idea who. In a panic, I called Samantha, who immediately contacted a real estate attorney. A few hours later, the situation was clarified. Someone had indeed interfered with the electronic payments, rerouting them to a different account, so the landlord hadn't received the funds. Instead of being afraid, I felt a new wave of determination. If James thought he could scare me off with these tactics, he was badly mistaken. With Samantha's help, I resolved the apartment issue quickly by providing bank statements proving that the payments had been withdrawn from my account. The building manager apologized, citing a technical error. But we both knew it wasn't accidental. "This is good," Samantha said when I told her what had happened. "The more they try to intimidate you, the stronger our case becomes. We'll add it to the file." But the problems didn't stop there. A week later, I found out my credit report had been trashed. Suddenly, there were unpaid bills and credit cards I had never heard of. A few days after that, debt collectors began calling. Samantha helped me sort it out, but it was clear James was using all his connections and resources to make my life a living hell. "He's scared," Samantha said as we discussed the attacks. "That's a good sign. It means we've got a real chance." Meanwhile, things began to change within the company. Henderson Innovations stock fell 5% after the first leaks about potential financial misconduct. The board launched an internal investigation, and their biggest client, Madison Technologies, demanded an explanation and threatened to terminate the contract if any violations were confirmed. I hoped Samantha was right, because the price I was paying for my courage was growing heavier by the day. Finally, the day of the legal meeting arrived. I was nervous but tried not to show it. Samantha, by contrast, looked completely calm, even slightly excited. The meeting was held in a neutral law office. James sat with 2 corporate attorneys and a financial advisor. I was there with Samantha and our forensic finance expert. David and Rachel waited outside as witnesses. James looked like he hadn't slept in days. His normally perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He avoided eye contact with me. The company's lead attorney, a tall man with a meticulously groomed beard named Andrew Collins, opened aggressively. "Ms. Reed is making serious accusations without sufficient evidence. This is defamation, and the company is prepared to file a countersuit. Furthermore, we have testimony that Ms. Reed herself violated corporate ethics by using work hours for personal projects." I felt my face flush. It was an outright lie. Samantha placed a hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay calm. "Mr. Collins," she said with a calm smile, Threats are not the best way to begin negotiations, especially when we have this. She laid a folder calmly on the table. Here are the altered financial reports with Mr. Henderson's annotations. Here are the recordings of his conversations with Mr. Martin. Here are the statements of 5 women regarding his inappropriate behavior. And finally, photos of the threats left on my client's vehicle, police reports of account breaches, and proof of tampering with her rent and credit history. I watched as James's face grew paler with each point. For the first time since I met him, he didn't look confident, he looked afraid. I should also note, Samantha added with a faint smile, that we haven't yet gone to the SEC or the press or the company's shareholders. Yet. And by the way, she turned to the financial advisor, we've also identified unusual transactions between company accounts and offshore entities connected to Mr. Henderson. You might want to take a look at that. It worked like a spell. The lawyers requested a recess to consult with their client. 20 minutes later, they returned with the proposal to settle the dispute through a confidentiality agreement and compensation. We're prepared to offer Ms. Reed a severance package equivalent to 1 year's salary, along with excellent references, the lead attorney said, in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. Samantha looked at me. The choice was mine. We're not interested in financial compensation, I said calmly. We want justice. James, who had barely spoken until then, suddenly asked to speak with me alone. Both legal teams were against it, but after some discussion, it was agreed that we would talk in the presence of Samantha without any other attorneys. When everyone else left the room, James looked me in the eyes for the first time. "What do you want, Emily?" he asked, and I heard exhaustion in his voice. He suddenly looked older than his age, with wrinkles I hadn't noticed before. "I want you to resign," I replied calmly. "I want David reinstated and promoted to head of the finance department. I want a public apology to all the women you harassed. And I want everyone to know who actually brought in Madison Technologies." James was silent, staring at his hands. Then he looked up, and I saw in his eyes a strange mixture of anger and respect. "You were always smart, Emily, too smart for your own good," he said, shaking his head. "All these years, you could have been my right hand. I offered you a promotion, remember? 3 years ago." I remembered. He had offered me a personal assistant position with a 20% salary increase. I declined, choosing to stay in the client relations department. I wanted to build a career based on merit, not proximity to the boss, I said. James smirked. "And how did that work out for you?" I said nothing. We both knew the answer. "And you?" he asked at last. "What do you want for yourself?" I thought for a moment. Strangely, I didn't feel the need for personal compensation or reinstatement. Over the past few weeks, I'd realized I didn't want to return to a company that allowed all of this to happen. "Nothing," I said, surprised by my own words. "I don't want anything more from you or this company." James stared at me for a long time, as if seeing me for the first time. "You know," he said finally, "in a way, I admire you. You have something most people don't. Principles. I agree to your terms. On one condition. I'll resign for health reasons, not because of the scandal." I exchanged glances with Samantha. She gave a slight nod. "Agreed," I said. "But if you break any part of this agreement, all the documents go straight to the SEC and the press." James nodded. "I understand. I suppose we're done here." As he stood up to leave, I suddenly asked, "Why did you do it, James?" "All these years? Why?" He stopped at the door and looked back. A strange, almost sad smile crossed his face. "You really don't get it?" he said with the unshakable arrogance of someone used to power. "When you're at the top of the food chain, rules only apply to those below. I'm the CEO, Emily. The company is me. The board, the shareholders, the employees, they're all just pieces on my chessboard. As long as they get their dividends and paychecks, no one cares how I play the game." He shrugged with infuriating nonchalance. Power exists to be used. And morals? He almost laughed. That's a luxury for people with nothing to lose. It took another month to finalize all the legal procedures. James did in fact resign due to health reasons, but the investigation into his financial misconduct continued without my involvement. 2 months later, I learned the SEC had launched a formal review, uncovering serious irregularities in the company's financial reporting. James faced a substantial fine and potential criminal charges. David was reinstated with a promotion, just as we had agreed. Charlotte quietly resigned after an internal investigation revealed that not only had she been having an affair with the boss, she had also been leaking information to a competitor, Rival Technologies, with whom James, it turned out, had close ties. I received a settlement and a formal apology, but the most important thing was that I finally felt free. Free from the company, from constantly having to prove my worth, from allowing others to exploit my work and talent without giving anything in return. The scandal at Henderson Innovations dominated Boston's business circles for several weeks. The company's stock dropped by 15%, and several major clients announced they were reconsidering their contracts. But thanks to swift and decisive action by the board, the company avoided total collapse. They appointed interim leadership and launched a large-scale audit of all financial operations. Rachel kept me informed of the changes at the company. Margaret from HR had been named interim CEO, and she began a series of major reforms. Did you know that now all promotions and bonuses are awarded by a committee, not by the CEO alone? Rachel told me during dinner. And Margaret introduced an anonymous whistleblower system. Sounds good, I smiled. It's a shame a scandal had to happen for those changes to be made. Sometimes that's the only way change happens, Rachel shrugged. By the way, David is doing great. You know what the first thing he did was? He launched a full audit of all financial reports from the past 3 years. What did they find? Oh, there was a lot. Rachel's eyes lit up with gossipy glee. Turns out, Charlotte wasn't just James's lover. She was feeding confidential information to competitors. David found proof she had been leaking internal data to Rival Technologies in exchange for a share in their profits, and they weren't the only ones paying her. I can't say I'm surprised, I replied. She always seemed too calculating. Remember how Peter from IT mentioned she was sending files through her personal email? Yep, it all adds up, Rachel nodded. And the board, especially Elizabeth Foster, is really impressed with David's work. They're already talking about making him permanent CFO. Rachel leaned in closer. Did you know David's been asking about you? More than once, and not just about work? I felt my cheeks flush. What? David? You're kidding. Not at all, Rachel looked pleased. He's changed a lot these past months, more confident, even started dressing better, and he's clearly not indifferent to you. I shook my head, not sure what to think. David, quiet, unassuming David, who used to struggle with eye contact? But then I remembered the fire I'd seen in his eyes when he spoke about justice. The determination with which he stood up against injustice, despite the risks. Maybe I never truly knew David, or maybe the trials changed him, just as they changed me. Financially, things were still difficult. The settlement helped pay off the debts I'd accumulated during the battle, but I needed a stable income for the long term. I had sent my resume to several companies, but received few replies. My reputation as a whistleblower preceded me. At that point, Caroline brought up the idea of starting my own business again. Seriously, Emily, she insisted. Now you've got experience, a reputation, and let's be honest, a certain degree of notoriety. Use it. After several sleepless nights and long conversations with Caroline and her husband Jeremy, who had experience launching startups, I decided to take the risk. We put together a business plan for a consulting firm specializing in corporate ethics and gender equality. Jeremy helped with the initial investment, and Caroline took over marketing. One day, I received a call from Michael Edwards, the CEO of Madison Technologies, the very client I had brought in. Ms. Reed, we've been following what happened at Henderson Innovations, he said. It's impressive how you stood by your principles. Thank you, Mr. Edwards, but I'm not here for compliments, I replied, surprised he had called. Of course not. You're here because we'd like to offer you the role of Director of Strategic Accounts, double the salary and stock options. I was stunned. But my reputation, aren't you worried? Ms. Reed, Edwards interrupted, we're looking for someone with integrity and courage, someone who says no when it counts. Your actions showed exactly that. I couldn't help but smile. Life had apparently decided to reward me for my courage. I think we can talk about that, Mr. Edwards, I replied. But I do have some questions about your company's culture. And also, I've just launched my own consulting firm. Perhaps we could explore some kind of hybrid collaboration? He laughed. I'd be surprised if you didn't have questions. Join me for lunch tomorrow and we'll go over everything. And Ms. Reed. Yes? At our company, we value people who speak the truth, especially when it's inconvenient. The hiring process at Madison Technologies was thorough. 5 rounds of interviews with different executives, psychological assessments, reference checks. But every step convinced me that the company genuinely cared about its culture and values. In the end, we reached an unusual agreement. I became their Director of Strategic Accounts part-time, while continuing to grow my consulting firm, Reed Insights. 3 months later, I stood in my new office at Madison Technologies, unpacking boxes. My office was on the 42nd floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and a breathtaking view of the city. A lot had changed in those months. I had not only started a new career, I had finally learned to value myself. No more compromises, no more silence, no more playing by someone else's rules. There was a knock on the door. It was David with a bouquet of flowers. Congratulations on the new office, he said, handing me the bouquet. Rachel sends her regards. She's now acting Director of Marketing. And how's the promotion? Do you like being the boss? I asked, placing the flowers in a vase. David smiled, and I noticed how much he'd truly changed in those months. He carried himself with confidence, stood straighter, even swapped his glasses for a more modern pair. First thing I did was launch a full audit. He shook his head. And guess what? Charlotte wasn't just James's mistress, she was leaking company info to competitors. Yeah, Rachel mentioned that. I nodded. How's your sister? Is everything okay with the insurance? Better than okay. His eyes lit up. Margaret personally made sure she's on the best medical plan. And I've gone back to playing piano. Really? I was genuinely happy for him. Yeah, I play at a jazz bar on Friday nights. Nothing serious, just for the soul, he said with a shy smile. You could come listen sometime. I noticed him nervously fiddling with his shirt sleeve. Emily, I've been meaning to ask, would you have dinner with me this Friday? After my set? I froze, not believing my ears. David? Asking me out? The same David who once blushed and stammered when disagreeing in meetings? Who had spent years hiding behind Excel sheets like a shield? It seemed that the trials we went through had revealed things in both of us we hadn't known were there. Only if you don't mind Mr. Darcy getting jealous, I replied with a smile. David laughed, a surprisingly warm, lovely sound. I think we can convince him I'm not a threat. After he left, I walked over to the window and looked out over the city. Below, people bustled about their lives, little figures in a big world. A year ago, I would have said one person can't change the system, that it's safer and easier to stay quiet, to play by the rules, to keep your head down. But now I knew better. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to start a change. One sentence to break the silence. One person to say no when everyone else says yes. If you enjoyed the video, please support it with a like and a comment.